The central nervous system, CNS, is the part of the nervous system consisting of the brain and spinal cord. It receives and assimilates information from the body and the environment, and coordinates and affects the activity and functioning of the body. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, consists of the remainder of the nervous system tissue outside the CNS. The brain is contained and protected within the skull, and the spinal cord is located within the spinal canal, and is protected by the vertebrae. The components of the CNS are surrounded by a tough protective layered membrane called the meninges, and are bathed in cerebrospinal fluid, produced by the choroid plexus. The brain and spinal cord are composed of neurons, their axons and dendrites, and the supporting cells and structures. The CNS can also be divided into gray and white matter based on the appearance and color of the tissue at gross exam. The white matter is generally more superficial and consists of axons and oligodendrocytes. The gray matter is generally deeper and consists of neurons and unmyelinated fibers. Both gray and white matter have multiple types supporting cells, known as glial cells. The brain can be divided functionally into segments: the cerebral cortices, telencephalon, the thalamus and hypothalamus, diencephalon, the midbrain, mesencephalon, the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. These are neuroanatomical and functional designations, each with complex internal structures. Cerebral cortex controls all voluntary actions. It is the largest component of the brain, formed from multiple smaller areas including the cortex, basal ganglia, amygdala, and hippocampus. The two hemispheres together control most of the higher functions of the human brain, such as emotion, memory, perception, and motor functions. Hypothalamus. Deep brain structure that is involved in some involuntary or partially voluntary acts such as sleep and wake cycles, eating and drinking, and regulation of metabolic activity, including some hormone release. It links the nervous system to the endocrine system. Pons. Above the medulla, it helps to control some maintenance functions such as sleep, respiration, swallowing, bladder control, hearing, equilibrium, taste, eye movement, facial expressions, facial sensation, and posture. Medulla oblongata. Part of the brainstem, involved in regulation of autonomic functions, that are involved in control of numerous sensory and involuntary motor functions such as vomiting, sneezing, breathing, blood pressure, and heart rate. Thalamus. Deep brain structure that functions as an information relay to the cortices, and aids in functioning of sleep and wakefulness and consciousness, eating, drinking, defecation, and copulation. Cerebellum. Modulates the outputs of other brain systems, including motor control and cognition, as well as equilibrium and posture, aids in coordination and precision. The spinal cord is a long, thin, tubular bundle of nerve tissues and support cells and structures that reach from the base of the brain at the brainstem to mid-lumbar back, between the first and second lumbar vertebrae. The spinal cord functions to transmit signals from the brain to the body, and to transmit sensory signals from the body to the brain. It also houses the nerves of many reflex arcs to coordinate independent reflexes, such as withdrawal from noxious stimuli. 3 layers of connective tissues cover the brain and spinal cord, and function to protect the central nervous system. They are the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. Cerebrospinal fluid circulates in the space between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. Dura mater. The thick, tough outermost membrane that is closest to the skull. It envelopes the arachnoid mater and surrounds and supports the large dural sinuses that carry blood from the brain to the heart. Arachnoid mater. The middle layer, named for the spider web appearance. It is a thin, transparent membrane, is composed of fibrous tissue and, like the pia mater, is thought to be impermeable to fluid. It does not follow the convolutions of the surface of the brain. It is composed of an outer layer, arachnoid barrier cell layer, with tightly packed cells, and it functions as a barrier between the cerebrospinal fluid of the subarachnoid space and the blood circulation in the dura. Pia mater. A thin, very delicate membrane that is firmly adherent to the surface of the brain and spinal cord. It follows the contours of the gyri and sulci of the brain, the colorless fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. It is produced by the specialized ependymal cells of the choroid plexus, a network of capillaries and ependymal cells, within the ventricles of the brain. It circulates around the brain in the subarachnoid space and is reabsorbed in the arachnoid granulations, small protrusions of the arachnoid matter, to then enter the bloodstream. CSF functions to protect and cushion the brain and spinal cord, as well as for homeostasis and clearing of waste material. The blood-brain barrier, BBB, is a highly selective semi-permeable membrane that separates the circulating blood from the brain. It is formed by a complex system of capillary wall endothelial cells, with parasites embedded in the basal membrane, and astrocytic end feet sheathing the capillary. The complex system allows the passage of water, some gases, and lipid-soluble molecules, by passive diffusion, and the active selective transport of molecules such as glucose and amino acids that are required for neural function. Large components, such as bacteria or hydrophilic molecules, are restricted, while small hydrophobic molecules, hormones, and oxygen, are allowed. The cell types of the central nervous system include neurons. Nerve cell. They receive, process, and transmit information via chemical and electrical signals. Each neuron has a cell body, and two types of radiating processes, one axon and one or more dendrites. Axons are long projections that conduct electrical impulses, action potentials, away from the cell body. Dendrites are branched, radiating extensions of a nerve cell that propagate the electrical stimulation from other neurons toward the cell body. Terminology used to describe a bundle of axons differs depending on location. A bundle of axons in the PNS is called a nerve, whereas the same bundle in the CNS is called a tract. Glia, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, ependyma, microglia. The non-neural cells that function to support and aid the neurons. They have four main functions: 1. Surround and support the neurons. 2. Supply oxygen and nutrients for the neurons. 3. Insulation between neurons. 4. Destruction of harmful pathogens and cleanup and removal of dead neurons. The PNS connects the CNS to the torso and extremities. It consists of sensory nerves and somatic nerves and serves as a relay between the brain and spinal cord and the rest of the body. In the head, 12 cranial nerves carry somatosensory data and control the functions of the anatomic structures of the head, with a few exceptions. For the body, spinal nerves from the spinal cord are responsible for somatosensory information. The peripheral nervous system is composed of neurons, axons, and Schwann cells. Schwann cells of the PNS function similarly to the oligodendrocytes of the CNS. Both serve to add myelin sheaths to the axons, which act as insulation for better and faster proliferation of electrical signals along the nerves. They are slightly different in that a Schwann cell usually myelinates a single axon by completely surrounding it. Although they may myelinate many axons, especially when in areas of short axons. Oligodendrocytes usually myelinate several axons. CNS axons are typically shorter than PNS axons. The nervous system, both central and peripheral components, functions as a complete unit. The peripheral and central nervous system collects sensory input from the body and the external environment and transmits that input to the brain. The brain then processes and interprets the sensory input. Finally, the brain directs the body to respond appropriately to the sensory input. An additional component is association or integration, in which sensory perceptions and higher cognitive functions are combined with memories, learning, and emotion to produce a response. Some aspects of the CNS are unique and are important for understanding how disease processes and injury affect it. Does not regenerate. Unlike most structures of the body, neurons cannot regenerate. Damage or disease often results in permanent clinical deficits. Localized neurologic functional areas. Clusters of neurons in certain areas have specialized functions that cannot be assumed by other neurons. Damage results in permanent clinical deficits. Physical spatial restriction of the brain and spinal cord by the skull and spinal column prevent expansion. The cells and structures of the CNS have specific and unique response to damage and patterns of healing. Blood-brain barrier and cerebrospinal fluid circulation. The brain reacts to insult by two pathophysiologic processes that are the mechanisms for most of the damage that occurs to the CNS. Hemorrhage, accumulation of blood within or around the brain, that results in pressure on the brain tissue. Edema, accumulation of fluid within the brain that results in increased intracranial pressure. Further swelling can result in brain herniation. The CNS reacts to injury by swelling or bleeding. Since the capacity of the cranial vault is limited, any process that adds volume, or is space-occupying, can result in severe to life-threatening damage. These processes are the final common pathways for a wide variety of diseases and injuries. Disorders of the nervous system can be categorized in many ways. In this module, diseases will be subdivided into brief discussions, with examples discu.